So today's presentation, I hope, will provide a very detailed overview of the current status of the company, our plans going forwards, particularly for the next part of 2022, and the execution of our strategy. We may not cover verbally all the issues that are covered in the presentation, so I do recommend you, post this presentation, that you take some time to walk through the actual presentation pack and have a good read of some much more detailed information. As required, I draw you to, we can make it work. I draw you to the cautionary statement, so please review that and take note of the cautionary language. You might need to do it. So first up, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we operate. We pay our respects to all members of these Indigenous communities and to the elders past, present and emerging. We also recognise the importance of continued protection and preservation of their cultural, spiritual and knowledge practices. It's very important to the way that Novo operates that we respect and we continue to commit to building successful and mutual benefit relationships with our traditional owners. So as a board, we have a very clear strategy for Novo going forwards, and it is to continue to look at opportunities to grow our production profile to 250,000 ounces per year. As part of that, our primary focus at the moment is to bring Beatons Creek Phase 2 operations into production at a consistent 100,000 ounces per year production, and that's by mining the fresh resource of Beatons Creek, subject to things that we'll talk about in a minute of approvals and feasibility studies. We have a very aggressive exploration program over the next 12 months to drive the next stage of growth within the business, and we'll talk through drilling target priorities today at Becher for gold and Purdy's North, a focus on nickel and copper. As part of our work, we're very committed to building ESG excellence, and our ongoing support engagement with all stakeholders is important for us to deliver shared values in both economically, socially and sustainability. And we're in a good financial position. We have a cash balance of around $75 million Canadian, $61 million investment and $40 million in debt. And as we've previously announced, our plan is to execute a program to complete selling of the investments and to retire the debt by the end of the year. So let's initially focus on operations. So we've recently announced that the oxide mining and processing of the Beatons Creek oxide area will scheduled to be completed in Q3 2022. Once mining is completed, we'll action a phased wind down of operational activities, and we expect to have that completed by the end of October 2022. We do estimate that the wind down cost will have a one-off cost of around about $6 million Australian, and will have a monthly cost of around $1 to $1.3 million of maintaining the business in a state ready for immediate startup. As we go through the wind down, the team on site and here in Perth will be continually focused on minimising that holding cost while we wait for the transition to Beatons Creek. As I said, our focus is returning to operations as quickly as possible via mining the Beatons Creek fresh resource. To do that, our focus is on completion of the feasibility study, receiving approvals to allow mining, and we also need to complete our internal processes that will lead to a formal decision to progress with the mining, the final investment decision. So what's our plan for Beatons Creek? Beatons Creek Fresh is very, very important to the future cash flow performance of the business and our growth. The fresh resource in the PEA accounted for around 65% of the overall Beatons Creek mineralisation. So the phase 2 operation is expected to support higher grades and lower mining costs over a 3 to 4 year period. As we've announced, we do expect a 12 to 18 month production pause, until the commencement of that mining happens at Beatons Creek. And that's all really subject to the approvals from the West Australian government regulators. And as I've said before, completion of a feasibility study and final decision within Novo to commence development of the project. The feasibility study and the resource extension drilling that we'll talk about in a minute is very, very important to us to de-risk the project prior to making that formal decision. The board is very committed to making sure we use the right processes in place to make sure that the project can deliver the outcomes of the feasibility study. In terms of approvals, we've made our submission to the Western Australian Government Environmental Protection Authority in March, and we await their advice on the approval pathway that is required to get approvals to commence mining in Beatons Creek. That pathway will involve multiple agencies within Western Australia that are focused on the mining, environmental and water resources. At presently, our current estimate is that restart of operations will cost around $20 million, with the big chunky components being an initial pre-strip of waste of about $12 million and a new haul road of $8 million. And that investment will happen once we receive the final investment decision. And obviously at the moment there are estimates, and our feasibility study team will firm up those estimates as we move forwards. It's worth noting that the mining plan for Beatons Creek involves an initial waste strip that will allow us to commence mining, and the plan is that waste stripping will continue in parallel to ore mining. So we don't need to take all of the waste off the top of the fresh resource before we go mining. So if we look at the fresh development plan, the completion of the feasibility study will be based on an updated fresh resource, and that's critical to our ultimate consideration and decisions to commence mining. The work of the feasibility, as I said, is to really de-risk the project, both development of the project and then the operations as we mine it. And it's really important that that feasibility provides us confidence in the production and financial outcomes once we've made a decision to proceed. The study at the moment is progressing very well. Key work streams are underway and some have been completed. The drill out required for the resource update has been completed, and that will form the basis of the feasibility study when that resource is updated in coming months. We do expect to report a mineral reserve based on the updated mineral resource. And again, that will provide more confidence to shareholders on the certainty of production going forwards. The study team's busy optimising the project, particularly haulage, both in pit but also back to Beatons Creek. We're looking at opportunities for renewable power, which will reduce power costs, life of mine water supply to the processing plant, and importantly, the life of mine cost for tailings storage facility, which is a big cost component going forwards. Parts of the project has already shown real positives. We've completed the metallurgical and geotechnical drilling programs, which have confirmed previous work or shown no substantial issues. And people will recall from previous news releases that we've already treated a couple of test parcels from the Golden Eagle, from Grants Hill, which is fresh material through the Golden Eagle processing plant, and they performed very well in terms of throughput and also high recoveries. So the feasibility study is well on track for reporting in mid-Q4 this year, with the reporting of the resource hopefully in August this year. Whilst we're focusing on the feasibility and the resource update, we're very committed to completing as much resource and extension drilling as necessary to fully define the extent of the whole Beatons Creek open pitable fresh mineralisation before we start mining. And the reason for this strategy and the investment in that work is so that prior to start, we can develop a life of mine, optimised mine plan for the whole fresh mineralisation. And in that way, we'll be able to make sure that we're optimising and getting great shareholder value. So at the moment, our expenditure for the rest of this year on that drilling program is around about $7 million. It's a substantial investment, but as I said, it brings to us a chance to optimise the mine plan rather than race off in mining. And we have time to do it given delays in approvals. So the drilling has initially been completed across the key areas in Grants Hill, and that was part of the majority of the known mineralisation. The drilling program will now extend out beyond that, looking for extensions to the fresh mineralisation. Very importantly, the program of drilling to date has included drilling test parcels at 10 metres by 10 metre spacings to allow us to do resource comparisons to 20 metre by 20 metre space drilling. So as the resource model is detailed, that test parcel of drilling will allow reconciliations and improved confidence on the grade that will come out of the resource as we go mining. So a very important part of the work. To date, the drilling of the fresh has confirmed previous work, high-grade nature, it's got strong continuity, and the thickness of the mineralisation material is really good. And if you read previous releases a couple of weeks ago, you've seen very strong high grades come out of Beatons Creek Fresh. So at this stage, things are progressing very well in both the feasibility study and the resource drill out. The Golden Eagle processing plant is a great asset. It's a strategic asset for Novo, and we're really focused now, as well as Beatons Creek, on what is the next stage of getting value from that processing plant. As many people realised in the last 12 months, we've been focusing on looking for opportunities in the Mosquito Creek Oxide area, and we've completed drilling in Egina, Parnell and Daisy Central. All of those look promising, and we'll continue that drilling program in 2023, with a target of around 200,000 ounces of being delineated from that area. The work is also now progressing into the sulphide strategy, where we are targeting further near mine production that would come in post-mining of the fresh mineralisation. Historically, a lot of work has been done by previous owners on the Mosquito Creek sulphide mineralisation. Most of that is accessible by expanding existing open pits at Golden Eagle and Golden Gate. Previous metallurgical test work has shown that that mineralisation can, under certain conditions and expanding the processing plant, give us good recoveries. So our geological teams are very focused on defining that mineralisation, but also developing a program of work to be implemented next year of definition drilling to allow us to bring together a mineral resource. We expect a sulphide development program could take up to 4 to 5 years, depending on the work through 2023 to finding a resource. So a huge potential for Novo, but a period of work that will take a reasonable extension of effort to get to a final decision. A quick word on the processing plant. As I said, the Golden Eagle plant, it's a great strategic asset to us. Very good location to known resources. It's in very good condition, and it has a great expected long life. So our focus is always on how do we make this asset work for our shareholders. Whilst we're in the pause period, the processing plant will be ready to be able to be restarted very quickly. And as I said before, it has demonstrated that it can process and mill the free milling Beatons Creek fresh mineralisation with good throughputs and recoveries. On startup, apart from normal planned maintenance activities like changing the liners in the SAG mills, we need to do very few modifications to the plant going forwards, and there's no substantial expenditure planned for the processing plant. As we all know, it's a great kind of infrastructure, 1.5 million tonne per annum throughput. We've been putting higher throughputs through the Oxide. We've got a power station and a very good SAG mill. So that plant is a good asset for us going forwards. So I just want to turn to exploration. Exploration is really the greatest lever we have for growth in our business. We're fortunate that our exploration efforts are supported by a world-class exploration team, and they're very focused on looking at opportunities to grow the business. As most people are aware, we have a very large tenement base across the Pilbara, which at the moment is a bit over 11,000 square kilometres. As I've said on other investment calls, that number will continue to come down as we optimise the tenement package, as we look at what are the tenements that have the best potential for us. But without a doubt, that tenement package is very prospective for both gold and battery metals. So the remainder of this year, half two in 2022, we expect our exploration expenditure to be around $18 million. And that includes the complementary heritage and environmental studies that need to go with that. We'll expand on these in a couple of slides, but our key focuses are on Becher, which is a gold target, which has really the potential to be a standalone asset on its own. And we're focused on priority battery metal targets that have a great opportunity to add shareholder value to the business. So the Egina Gold District still remains a really exciting part of our key focus. We are focused on looking for the next Hemi deposit. Hemi is a project, a deposit part of the De Grey Group, which is an ASX-listed vehicle. We're looking for structural and geological continuity of that deposit within our tenements. The Hemi deposit is huge, over 8 million ounces of gold. It's currently in a pre-feasibility study, moving to feasibility study by De Grey. So a very, very exciting area for us. We're continually focusing on basement gold targets, and Becher is only the first of many that we hope to focus on over the coming 12 to 18 months. Becher is very large. It's got northwest trending epithermal veins. They were previously tested by other owners, but we have the opportunity now to expand that work going forwards. So for the rest of the year, we've got a very advanced plan, which will include over 35,000 metres of air core drilling. We're going to do some more high resolution aeromagnetics to help us target further opportunities in drilling. And we'll take all of that work and build a substantial 3D model, which will allow us to move into the next phase of drilling by RC either later this year or early next year. So Becher is extremely exciting to us. We hope to be drilling late July, early August, once we complete all the heritage approvals, and it really could be a game changer for Novo. Whilst non-gold minerals may not be our priority focus, parts of our tenement are absolutely very prospective for battery metals, whether it's lithium, nickel, and cobalt. And we've seen the prices of those metals climb in recent times. So it really would be remiss of us not to target our exploration team to identify areas of such mineralisation. The first cab off the rank has been the identification of nickel at Purdy's North, which again is an exciting opportunity for us. Importantly, it's adjacent to Azuras, which is an Australian listed company, their Andover project, and they've already produced a maiden resource of about 5 million tonnes of rock. Azura continue to drill their part of the nickel corridor, and likewise, we hope to do so in the near future. Purdy's North is just not one target. There's multiple targets that the team have identified. We've followed up with geophysics, both IP and FLEM. The exploration team are busy analysing that data to allow us to formally develop proper targeting, and we hope to commence drilling late July or early August, again subject to the heritage survey work, which is already underway. So we see this nickel copper corridor that extends from Azura to us and then even down to an ASX listed company, Artemis, as very prospective going forwards. We will continue to focus our exploration efforts until we can get to a point where we can realise value to our shareholders. And at that point, the board will make a decision on whether we progress solely on it or whether we look at opportunities to JV or divest the project. So having a quick look at conglomerates, which still remains part of our focus going forwards. So as you've seen in recent announcements, due to our focus on Beatons Creek Fresh, the need to do the feasibility study and the work on approvals and restart, and our excellent work on exploration, we've decided to defer the next stage of the Comet Well project, which was the phase 3 trial, until next year. The work that has been completed at Comet Well over many years, including recent works at Nullagine, using the ore sorter that we've purchased, and there's a nice picture of that down the bottom. That work has continually shown that both low-grade and high-grade Comet Well materials can be sorted very well, high gold recoveries, and importantly, what they call low mass pull, which means we're separating the waste very effectively from the gold. So we're very pleased with the work to date, and it is actually very, very exciting. So the phase 3 trial at Comet Well, which we have deferred, is very essential for us to define the amount of gold that we actually have at Comet Well. It allows us to look at productivities, the equipment, and the infrastructure requirements for going into production. But importantly, it allows us to have the data needed to get the government approvals, which we would submit, late 2023. Whilst we continually focus on, that work, our exploration team are continuing their focus on conglomerates. We really are looking to find other conglomerate opportunities that are close to the Golden Eagle processing plant, because they have the best opportunities to bring early shareholder value. So particularly, you'll hear over the next 6 months follow-up work by the exploration team at Skyfall, and continual exploration at Goldeneye, Croydon and Greyland. So people should be very assured that conglomerates remain part of our focus going forwards, and there's an exploration strategy and a development strategy for those as well. So just summary in exploration, as I said, very large focus on basement gold targets with that drilling at Besha, over 35,000 metres of air core drilling starting late July and August. We'll continue the work at Purdy's North and the tenements around there, both geophysics and hopefully drilling in the near future. You've just heard about the conglomerates, focused on Skyfall, Golden Eagle and West Pilbara targets, looking for opportunities for bringing conglomerates into money. And we haven't talked too much about Victoria, but it's a very important part of our exploration portfolio. We did a recent announcement on an update on the work that's happened at Malmesbury and the future plan to complete drilling over the rest of this year. And we look forward to the results of those drillings as we really defined the mineralisation and the geological setting at Malmesbury. But it remains a very interesting part of the world. So I just want to quickly touch on ESG. As a company, we are very committed to our ESG performance and, importantly, the commitments we make to all of our shareholders in terms of the way that we manage the environment, our aspects with social and stakeholders, and also make sure we've got good governance. So we've made a decision to align our ESG work with the global international standard, the ICMM, and we've started that work of aligning our systems and processes in-house with the ICMM process. Later this year, you'll see our first sustainability statement, and that'll be followed by our first sustainability report in 2023. We firmly believe that ESG performance is critical to our ongoing focus as a business, not just in terms of inviting future investors into the business, but also in our engagement with traditional owners, communities, government regulators, our employees, and also our suppliers and contractors. So a very important part of our business, and you'll continue to see more discussions, particularly in the sustainability statement later this year. So in summary, we do have an aggressive exploration program. We have some exciting drilling targets, and it really is an exploration portfolio that would be the envy of many Australian mining companies. The board has a very detailed strategy in place to transition from Beatons Creek fresh mining, and then beyond that, looking at opportunities to extend production using the Mosquito Creek oxide and sulphide mineralisation. We've developed a long-term strategy and an in-house focus to grow the business to be an overall annual producer of over 250,000 ounces of gold, and we've set ourselves a target of achieving that around about 2026. As you've heard, advancing our ESG work is critical to us. We see it as a key focus, and we want to be a sector-leading performer in that area. We're in a good financial position. As I said at the start, we've got a cash balance of 75 million, 61 million investments, and we have 40 million debt. And as we've talked about, we will retire the debt by the end of the year through the remaining sale of the NFG shareholding. And you have a very good, experienced board made up of people who have an ESG, a legal, company secretarial, geological, mining, and finance background, well supported by a world-class management team in Perth. So just finally, let's just touch a little bit on strategy. Late last year, the board spent a lot of time looking at the strategy of Novo going forwards, and we will do so again later this year. From that work, we really focused that, Novo, we want to embrace innovation to responsibly transform minerals for the benefit of all of our stakeholders. Our stakeholders are very important to us. They are our shareholders, our employees, our traditional owners and communities and governments and suppliers. And we focus on all of our work across all of our end-to-end holistic value businesses in the business to achieve good outcomes with those. And we are a mining company. Our focus is on looking for value out of the shareholding and the tenements that we have. And we are focused and have got the capabilities for exploration and development production. But as we've talked about in terms of lithium recently and nickel, we're more than comfortable to enter commercial arrangements should that provide the best value for shareholders. So I thank everyone for listening, and I'm now going to hand over to Ronan to help facilitate 15 odd minutes or so of questions. Thank you, Ronan.
Very much, Mike. Just work to the appendix to this page. If anybody has any further questions after this session, you're welcome to email them to Leo, whose contact info should be on your screens now, and we will happily answer them. Thanks everyone for submitting your questions during the presentation. I'm going to try and summarize them in terms of, I suppose, financials, operations, and exploration. And I'll take the first one, and I'm just going to read these out or paraphrase so that everybody knows what the question is, because I appreciate that attendees can't actually see them on their screen. So somebody has asked, does the selling of investments, which we referenced earlier in the presentation, include all of our investments, including E3D, for example, or is it just limited to the shares of Newfound Gold? Currently, we're only committed to selling the shares of Newfound Gold per our news releases in mid and late April, but we continuously assess our assets for value maximization. I will remind everyone that E3D is unlisted. It's a private company, but in terms of book value, our adjusted cost base is only 14 cents US, and we're currently valuing it at about $6.27 US. So there's been some incredible growth over, I suppose, 7 years. We first invested in 2015, and again, we continuously assess these opportunities, but there is no plan or commitment to sell anything other than Newfound, which has been announced in April. That's the only financial question I've received so far. Perhaps if I jump to operations, and I'm going to paraphrase a couple of questions and summarize, can we just comment, Mike, on status of Oxide, where we are today, and then plans for the fresh going forward?
Okay, so if we just summarize some of the items that we've done in the presentation. So oxide mining, actually, drilling and blasting and moving oxide material, that will continue until essentially the end of August. At that time, the mining fleet will demobilise from site, and we'll then go into a period of about 4 to 6 weeks of processing all of the stockpiled ore at Golden Eagle. So that will be, I think it's around about 100,000 tonnes of material will be processed. At the end of that processing, we'll basically stop crushing and milling, and we then draw down the gold stocks within all of the CIL tanks and carbon stripping, etc. So that's the plan we're going through. So oxide operations per se will be well and truly completed by the end of September, a little bit in October. Through that process, as I said, the mining contractor and contractors, drill and blast and others, will demob. And in the processing plant, our processing team, a very good Novo team, unfortunately we'll be downsizing that team. But on site, we're maintaining a very strong technical team in both geology, mining, environmental, and a small team to allow us to maintain the processing plant. And that team is really focused on completing that work for the feasibility study, the drill out, but importantly, allowing us to have a rapid restart when we're ready. And then, really, as we said, the key to that is achieving government approvals to allow us to mine the fresh. I think it's worth just capping some of the news flow in terms of the fresh. As soon as we hear from the EPA, we'll provide that advice to all shareholders. In August, you will see advice on the resource update. Obviously, mid-Q4, you'll receive advice on the feasibility study. And in the periods thereafter, we'll also continue to bring people along the journey for the approvals.
Another question that was received, which is quite an interesting one about Western Australia specifically. Do we see inflation and wage costs and labour issues improving, and by how much through 2023? And is that part of why the mechanical sorting program has been deferred? Maybe I would start with the fact that, particularly in WA, we're seeing incredible pressure, particularly on wage costs. And I'm not sure if everybody's aware, but one of the bigger companies, Rio, recently gave WA employees a specific raise over and above everybody else across the world. So WA is a specific industry, especially in mining, that's seeing cost pressures.
If you look at the general mining industry within West Australia at the moment, post coming out of the major aspects of COVID, we're seeing a significant shortage of labour, and that's across the board. That's impacting CAS in terms of getting drillers for drilling rigs for exploration, all the way through to people working in government in the approvals or miners departments. So there's a significant shortage of labour and skills across the board. That is definitely driving pressures on salaries, and we're seeing significant increases across the board. In parallel, like everyone else in the world, diesel costs are extremely high, fuel costs in West Australia, and we're also seeing increases in costs of consumables like mill consumables, mill balls, reagents for processing, explosives, flights. Basically across the board, we're now seeing those cost increases all the way through. They were reasonably contained all the way through Q1 this year, but Q2 has really seen, inverted commas, a breakout of those costs. So that doesn't help the operators and even us as explorers to manage costs going forwards. The issue with the Commonwealth ore sort is really related to our internal capacity to be able to do the feasibility study, the approvals work, the exploration work, the wind down. So it's not related to the cost pressures that we're seeing across the operations.
And another question, just back to Beatons Creek and operations, specifically around permitting. We have a few people who are concerned about the status of the fresh permit. Can you just comment on that? Yeah,
so a little bit more detail. So over many years, Novo has completed substantial technical environmental work on the fresh. I think Ronan, somewhere over $5 million might be expended on that work over 8 to 9 years. So that technical work has now been presented to the Environmental Protection Authority. Our work has shown that mining of the fresh has very low risk in terms of environmental issues. And we also believe that we have a process in mining the fresh that would contain the real concern of many regulators, which is acid rock drainage, the leaching of sulfides out of the material. So a lot of great work has been done. So because of the location of the project in a P1 water resource and near to Nullagine, this project has to be assessed by the EPA, and we will wait their assessment. The assessment essentially has two pathways. They will decide to do more internal work, particularly maybe a public review, or they will immediately pass it on to what is essentially the mining department or the water departments within West Australian government. So first step on that approval is to receive the advice on the approval pathway. And then the second step for us is to work with all of the agencies on what work is required by them to do the final assessment and approval. And until we hear the pathway, we don't know the time limit. We're obviously all hopeful that it's not going to take 12 to 18 months, but at the moment, that's our best estimate.
Before I jump into a few exploration questions, I would just like to acknowledge and thank an anonymous attendee who believes that the gold price will be 3,600 US in the future. Appreciate that optimism. Thank you. We would certainly like to see that as well. In terms of exploration, there's a question about battery metals specifically, battery metals and commercial arrangements. First of all, timeline to exploring a battery metals deposit, and then what would happen with commercial arrangements. Maybe I'll start with the commercial arrangements side and just say that that would certainly follow exploration and results and hopefully a discovery. But as we noted in our mid-April news release with Sumitomo, we are exploring other avenues, and we can say that they're certainly interested in not just gold, but battery metals and other metals. But perhaps
I think it's important to say that we kind of expect that we will have some pretty good information by the middle of next year to understand the potential of the nickel resource. Kaz and her team do need time to do some drilling, some follow-up drilling, some analysis. So Kaz, it's probably really mid next year. It's not something that we'll know by Christmas.
Sure, and a lot of this relates to access to the ground. So we already have a claim-wide agreement with Nullagine, who are our heritage partners in the area. So we've been able to access the ground already to do basic work, non-ground disturbing work. And you'll see from really, it was only last October 2021 that we started to really focus on the area around Purdy's North. So already we've got targets. We're ready to drill. We've just finished first part of the heritage survey on Purdy's North, which is great. We're just waiting for the final reporting and go ahead now. We've also completed some IP geophysics, and we're close to finishing the ground electromagnetic work as well, which will actually enable us to target for drilling. So we're pretty sure that we can begin drilling late July, early August. And as Mike said, with turnaround of assays and a few other things that do cause additional delays, we probably won't get the complete picture until early next year, maybe even mid next year. So time frame wise, turnaround in a year. We've got great rocks. We've got really good ground surface geochemistry, and we've got some great targets now in the geophysics that we're working up from a preliminary state to a 3D model to be able to target.
Yeah, it'd be fair to say that within the confines of the West Australian mining industry, people are definitely looking over our fence to see how successful we will be, driven off the great success by Azure, which is only a couple kilometres away. You can stand on our tenements and actually see Azure's drill rigs drilling away. So there's a lot of interest in Perth on how we go.
Maybe just transitioning, because we have a couple of questions about native title and access. I want to comment on the general aspect of that, and then a specific question about Egina.
Yeah, so across the board, we have, through our tenements, we have relationships with 9 traditional owners. all the way down to Bellamy on the south and closer to home. In terms of around the Nullagine and Beatons Creek, we work with the Nummel and the Palku, and we have mining agreements with those people that allow us to mine, and they receive royalties through production. Closer to home on exploration, the Nullama Group are part of West Pilbara. They are very supportive of mining and have had a great history of working with mining companies, and they're working with Kaz's team at the moment, completing the heritage surveys that requires for drilling. And those heritage surveys are about identifying ethnologically and archaeological artifacts or heritage items to make sure that we don't disturb those or destroy or alter their heritage and culture. So that's a very much a working relationship between all of us. So as Kaz said, the Nullama Group have completed their first survey. We're waiting on the reports. Kaz then uses those surveys to define the final drilling program. And then the Nullama will complete surveys in other areas. And then the same with Egina, which is a different group, the Garryara Group. They've completed part of the survey, and we are expecting next week that they will continue the survey that will allow Kaz to get on and do the air core drilling for Besha. And then we hope to work with the Garryara Group to complete further surveys in the Egina area so Kaz can complete exploration. In normal circumstances, soil collection, rock chip sampling, all of those type of things can proceed on our tenements without requiring heritage surveys. But once we need to go drilling for larger disturbances of the land, their country, including access roads, fly camps, drilling activities, etc., we need to complete heritage surveys to allow us to go drilling, and that's required by the Heritage Act. Down the track, if Besha was very, very exciting in terms of a mining operation, we would then work with the traditional owners on completing a mining agreement, which would include support for them, but also royalties.
Look, we'll do 2 more questions before we wrap things up. One is very specific around the 2019 Egina MAC sample, status thereof, and some commentary on that, perhaps.
Yeah. Sure. I must admit, I did go back and research this one in a little bit more detail. In essence, at the end of 2019, we'd completed some bulk samples around a particular area which we designated the main whānau swale. And we've certainly got some interesting gold nuggets out of that alluvial part of one of the mining leases that we have access to for both non-ground disturbing and ground disturbing work. We did additional work then on MAC sampling. So obviously, whoever's asked this question understands that these are 1-ton samples that we use almost as a soil sample to be able to figure out whether or not there's gold in the alluvials. We didn't really find any coarse gold, but the MAC samples are really based a little more around the fines and the fine gold in the sampling. I think there's a couple of things that go into where we sit with the alluvials at Egina. First of all, COVID really did have quite an impact on our ability to be able to do heritage clearance surveys. As Mike's just explained, anytime we want to do more than a walk over the ground to do geophysics or to do basic soil samples, which are very small sample collection, we can do that type of thing. Excuse me. But to do a 1-ton sample, clearly we have to have heritage surveys completed. And, you know, as COVID hit, our traditional owners were particularly susceptible to the advances of COVID. And so they were protected very much so by obviously their own internal governance, but also by West Australian legislation, which pretty much didn't allow any access to any of the regional communities that we work with. So that caused a real sort of halt in our ability to do heritage clearances for over a year, I'd say. And at the same time, you know, we basically just moved into the decision to take over the Millennium Project and put together the work that we're doing now in the Mosquito Creek Basin and on Beatons Creek in terms of the mining. So there were a few things that impacted our ability to cover everything all at once. And at the same time, really, we really do need to be able to get clearance to work outside of the original mining leases that we have in the Yandi Yarra Reserve and the exploration license that is a joint venture with De Grey. But those are the only areas that we have access to be able to explore inside the Yandi Yarra Reserve, which is quite a large area. If you have a look at in the slide pack, you'll see I put it in specifically to show the difficulty that we have trying to do that type of ground disturbing work outside the areas.
Kaz, I want to get you to expand a little bit more. The importance of the Aeromag survey work you're doing in the Egina district to go back to basics, I think would be of interest as part of the bigger Egina story.
Sure. So, I mean, the alluvials,
to set you up.
Yeah, the alluvials as well. It'll certainly help with the alluvials as well as looking at the bigger picture exploration story around Hemi. It would certainly be remiss of us not to follow up on areas that we've targeted now for orogenic gold. So we did pivot a little bit in the middle of last year to look more to the other things that we've come across whilst we've been exploring in the last few years. So particularly the base metals that we've talked about and the battery metals out of Karratha around Purdy's, and certainly the Besha district, which is outside the Yandi Yarra Reserve, has far more potential, we think, for orogenic gold and hence shareholder value than it does for alluvials. There's still areas that we need to test with alluvials, but unfortunately, we're really restricted to the mining leases at the moment. And it's really for an assessment, I think, going forwards. We certainly haven't forgotten about them. There's certainly, you know, one of the main reasons we got into that Whānau ground were the original swales, but we just don't see the ease of being able to assess that prospectivity really quickly, whereas outside the reserve we can.
Thanks, Kaz.
So look, to summarize a few questions into one final one, Mike, just commentary on funding and driving, or our plans rather, to drive shareholder value.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. A good question to kind of finish up. So as we've talked about, we sit as a company with a pretty strong financial position. Today, compared to previous, we've provided a lot more guidance on our expenditure profile for the rest of the year. So, you know, we sit here today with a very aggressive program on Beatons Creek and exploration and those other strategy things, and we're funded to complete that work all the way through to this year and early next year. Depending on the success of exploration and other opportunities that come our way, you know, we will then assess our financial position. But at the moment, we look in a very good position for the rest of the year to do the work that we need to do. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. As I said at the start, there's a lot of details, so please take time to read through the presentation. Importantly, over the next 3 months, there'll be a lot of news flow on the Beatons Creek work, the exploration work, and there'll be the normal statutory reporting through the quarter. And in the early part of July, you'll see a report on the gold production for this quarter. So thanks for everyone for joining us.